Hi. When we think of the way various countries are handling disasters such as pandemics, floods, and many more, we usually examine it through our own lenses. But can administrative actions taken in a democracy be examined in the same fashion as in authoritarian regimes? I believe that if one aims to understand and analyze how different countries function in times of crisis, we need to take the specific context under consideration. To better understand the context of authoritarian regimes, let me take you on a journey to the Middle East. Why the Middle East? Well, the Middle East serves as a microcosm where many manifestations of the crisis reflect on other parts of the world. All Muslim countries in the Middle East are ruled by authoritarian regimes. And this begs the question, do such governments cope better or worse than democracies in such a crisis? Furthermore, many of the countries in the region are poor and suffer from high population density, which have direct impact on the means to combat the spread of a pandemic. I am Meir Litvak, a historian of the modern Middle East here at Tel Aviv University. So, first thing first, what are the main features of authoritarian governments which may impact their coping with disasters such as pandemics? Theoretically, authoritarian governments should have an easy time coping with disasters. All the ruler has to do is give orders, and the government machine and people will obey. The reality is far more complex. The first feature is the absence of legal checks on the authority of the government. In the absence of an effective legislature, judiciary, and free media. In order to maintain their hold on power, authoritarian governments always need enemies, internal or external. These enemies supposedly threaten the country and therefore justify the use of strong measures against those who challenge the government's power or raise any criticism over the policies and measures it takes, or fails to take. In other words, promoting a siege mentality is always helpful in mobilizing the population behind the regime. For example, in the past, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin spoke of the capitalist encirclement that threatened the Soviet Union. Today, the Islamic Republic of Iran describes the US as the great Satan, Shaitan-e Buzurg, and highlights the constant threat of the Western cultural onslaught, Tahajjum Farhangi, against Islam and Islamic culture. Because authoritarian governments are always afraid of popular discontent that may lead to rebellions, they often resort to fake news. Either they hid the truth regarding the real socioeconomic situation of the country, or, in the case of the 2020 COVID-19, hid the true extent of the spread of the pandemic, or charge external enemies of spreading the disease. Another characteristic is that civil society, that is the area of social and political institutions that stand between the individual and the state, is usually very weak in such countries. While this weakness is beneficial for authoritarian regimes, it may also exacerbate the difficulties of coping with a disaster or crisis. And lastly, authoritarian governments rely on fear more than on the trust of their people, again raising the question of popular compliance with government measures to combat the pandemic or any other crisis. Now, let's move on to discuss some of the special features of the Middle East, which in our case will cover the area from North Africa to Iran. The most common cultural feature is the importance of Islam, but the region is riven by national, ethnic, sectarian, and economic cleavages. In addition, aside from few small oil-rich countries, most states in the region are poor and suffer from undeveloped basic infrastructure. At the same time, Middle Eastern countries suffer from a massive population increase which most local economies could not cope with. In addition, global warming and sometimes wasteful irrigation practices have led to increasing water shortages and major population movements from the countryside to overcrowded slums in all big cities. The major upheaval that has shaken the region since 2011, the so-called Arab Spring, was the outcome of popular frustration and anger over the failure of the authoritarian regime rulers to provide basic social needs such as employment, housing, and decent standard of living, as well as lack of hope for the future. Even worse, the so-called Arab Spring led to brutal civil wars and mass violence in countries like Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Libya, which killed hundreds of thousands of people, 500,000 in Syria alone, uprooted millions, from their homes and turned them into internal refugees in their own countries or in crowded makeshift camps in neighboring states. In addition, the large-scale devastation and political turbulence made an already difficult economic situation into a severe crisis. Many of the problems which I described are not unique to the Middle East and can be found in other parts of the world. All of them, however, confront Middle Eastern countries and societies with special challenges as they face disasters and crises.